Hi there VC, it's Steve with you here. This video is slightly different to what I've normally done. This is as it said in the titles, an appreciation of Be-Bop Deluxe, a band that I've come to know and love over the past few years. My introduction to the band came from listening to Joe Elliott's radio show on Planet Rock, which broadcasts on a Saturday night between 6 and 7. And Joe Elliott, he's a big music fan, and he doesn't normally just play just like heavy rock. He'll play all the influences. He's a big Bowie fan, and one band he was playing a lot of was Be-Bop Deluxe, and I was sort of like, "Ooh, this sounds good." I was aware of the band. I knew of Shippers in the Night when it occasionally came on the radio, but as far as the catalogue, I had no real idea what they were about. So with my interest stemmed, I went on iTunes and downloaded a copy of Air Age, an anthology, and I liked what I listened to. So when we're talking about Be-Bop Deluxe, we're really talking about Bill Nelson. Now, he was born on the 18th of December 1948 in Wakefield, in Yorkshire. He attended Wakefield College of Art, and during this time he developed an interest in Jean Cocteau. This is something that's developed throughout his career. His big influence on the guitar is Duane Eddy, and also Hank Marvin of the Shadows. During the time at college, he started appearing on records by local acts, just sort of like local releases. There was like in this late 60s, early 70s, a bit of a local scene around Yorkshire, Wakefield, Leeds, etc. Bill Nelson's first appearance on a solo recording, was an album called Northern Dream, and that appeared on the Smile label. Bill Nelson sent a copy of Northern Dream down to John Peel to give a listen. I think, as at that time, as throughout his career, Peel was quite a big influence on a lot of acts. And the album was sent more on a chance more than anything. Didn't think anything would come off it. But John Peel was kindly sent Bill Nelson a letter back saying, "Have a listen to the show tonight." And Peel played that album in its whole entirety. He played side one, then told the audience he was going to play side two, and he played side two. In those days, you could get away with doing that sort of thing. Also, listening to the show that night were executives from EMI who liked what they listened and wanted to sign Nelson. However, when they contacted him, he'd said, "Well, you know what, that's great, but I've moved on. I've formed a band," and that band was Be-Bop Deluxe, and he was in the process of writing the debut album. The lineup at the time consisted of Bill Nelson on guitars and keyboards, Robert Bryan on bass, Ian Parkin guitar, and Nicholas Chatterton Drew on drums. There was an original keyboardist, Richard Brown, but he came and left quite quickly. Originally a blues-based band, they were very popular in the West Yorkshire scene. EMI came up and had a look at the band and sort of like, "There's promise there. Keep gigging. We'll come up and we'll come and check you out in a few months' time." And this happened over a period of a couple of years. And it got to a point where Be-Bop Deluxe went down to play their first London show, doing a support act at the Marquee. And they were sufficiently impressed EMI to sign them to the EMI Harvest label. And at that time, they released the first album, which is Axe Victim. And you can see from here, there's a lot of the glam look amongst the band here. The album, it's got the look of glam, as I said, art rock, but elements of progressive rock. There was something for everybody, potentially everybody, in this album. Produced by Ian McClintock. The album is probably the best track. The The glam elements comes in tracks like the title track Axe Victim, but your more progressive comes in the track Adventures in a Yorkshire Landscape, which is just an amazing track. The album failed to chart, and the executives of EMI were sort of like thinking that the band itself was a little bit amateurish, and were getting on to Bill Nelson saying you need to be a bit more professional in your outlook. And it's while touring with Cockney, so support to Cockney Rebel, where the penny dropped and Bill Nelson realised that the band could be better. So he disbanded, after that tour, disbanded the original band. He reformed the band with a couple of members of Cockney Rebel, Paul Jeffries on bass and Milton Ream James on keyboards. And he also then brought Simon Fox in on drums. This lineup, however, was only to last for a couple of gigs. Jeffries and Reams James left pretty quickly afterwards. So, recruited on bass was a New Zealander, Charlie Tumalai, on bass, supplied bass and backing vocals. And this lineup was to record the second album, Futurama. There's the band on the back. This was produced by Roy Thomas Baker and was released in July 1975. Reception to the album was itself mixed. I think many critics were confused by the mix of styles, and Bill Nelson admitted that the recording of the album was a bit fraught. He and Thomas Baker sort of frequently clashed during recordings. However, it wasn't a total flop. Eventually, the track "Made in Heaven" did end up going in the singles chart as part of the Hot Valves EP in October 1976 and reached the heady heights of number 36. Also added to the album was Andrew Clark, who played the keyboards, and he played keyboards on the tour as well. And eventually he was to join the band on a full-time basis. This became the stable lineup for the band for the rest of their career. And the first album recorded was Sunburst Finish. This was recorded at Abbey Road, and it started the partnership that Nelson struck up with John Leckie. Leckie was a staff engineer at EMI, who they thought was ready to step up as a producer. Bill Nelson at this time had gone to EMI and said, look, I want to produce my own stuff now. And teaming him up with Leckie was sort of their way of a compromise. And this was the beginning of a fruitful relationship that stood out for the majority of their career. Released in February 1976, the album reached number 17 in the chart. It was the first time that an album had reached the charts. And the big single was Ships in the Night, which reached number 23 and it provided them their biggest hit single. Again, the style of the album is art rock, progressive rock, which sort of took them forward towards. It took them further than what Futurama had done. But ironically, people were picking up on the fact that there was a guitar theme going through the band. First album, Axe Victim, Axe, sort of another term used for guitar. Futurama was apparently a make of guitar, and Sunburst Finish is a finish that you get on, I think, particularly on Gibson Les Pauls. So, fueled by that success, they went on to produce their fourth album, which was Modern Music. Now again, this was released in 1976, September 1976, so we're talking about a 7-month period in between two albums coming out. The title track itself was inspired by the band's first big tour of the USA. Sort of Nelson always wanted to go to America, and I think, in a sense, it felt that it didn't quite match to those expectations. The album itself reached number 12 in the UK album charts, and it was during the tour that the band recorded their live album, Live in the Air Age. This was released in August 1977 and reached number 10 in the album chart. This provided the band with the highest album charts placing. But at this point, Bill Nelson was starting to feel constrained by the band's lineup. He'd started to listen to David Bowie, particularly his Berlin period, and punk new wave. And at this point, he wanted to split the band and go in a totally different direction. The execs at EMI sort of persuaded him, hold on, you've got something good going here. Try and implement your new ideas into your band. And the band's final album is Drastic Plastic. Now, this was released in February 1978, and it reflected those introduction of those new wave influences into the band. You still got your progressive, you still got your art rock. The glam had gone by then. But, that those new sounds that had come in, it's a totally different album. Totally different direction. It's an album that picked up on its time. Islands of the Dead was dedicated to his father, Walter, who had passed away in 1976. But the album didn't really satisfy Nelson enough. He wanted to embrace more new wave sound, and so he broke up the band. He went on and formed Red Noise, which featured Andy Clark on keyboards. As for the rest of the band, Charlie Tumahai stayed and played with various bands in the UK before returning to New Zealand in 1985. He started playing with the reggae band Herbs, and started getting involved with Maori projects until his unfortunate death of a heart attack in 1995. Simon Fox worked with Trevor Rabin and played with the Pretty Things before sort of disappearing from the music scene. He's now back drumming with a band called The Parade. Red Noise itself wasn't that great a success, unfortunately. Unfortunately for Nelson, EMI got taken over by Thorn, who was a major electronics firm, and as he put it in an interview, what happened was the businessmen started taking over the record labels in the 80s, and a lot of acts, Red Noise, Wire, were deemed uncommercial and were jettisoned. Clark himself, after Red Noise, went on to play on Bowie's Scary Monsters, and he also featured on the first two albums by the DBs. Bill Nelson went on to produce the Skids, particularly Days in Europa album. He went on in the 80s to form Cocktail Records. Freed by the constraints of the band, he went on to developing his new ideas in sound with the new wave electronic. Like everybody, his careers suffered ups and downs, and he went bankrupt. And there was this time where he wasn't even getting any royalties from his Be-Bop Deluxe recordings, especially when they were reissued on CD. Bad management was cited to blame for that. Nelson himself still lives in York, and he still has releases records, and he's still involved in the music industry. Sadly, his live appearances have been curtailed by losing the hearing in his right ear. Bill Nelson is a great guitarist, a great musician. And to help you appreciate him more, I'm going to include some links to some old Great Whistle Test appearances. There's a Sight and Sound BBC concerts. Sight and Sound was a show where they'd show a concert, recording of a concert on the television, and on the radio at the same time they would also broadcast, so you could listen to it in stereo while watching it on the TV. And I'll also include a interview Bill Nelson gave with Cherry Red Records. It was to coincide with the release of a compilation. It's a really interesting interview, and you probably find that most of what I've said has come from that. So I hope you enjoy this little appreciation of Be-Bop Deluxe. A little known gem of a band who I know have recently started been getting a lot of love on the VC, and I think deserve a lot more love. Such a great band at that time, and so many there, and I think there's so many great bands out there, apart from the obvious ones we all eulogise, that are waiting to be discovered. Vinyl Professor James Griffiths did the Motors, and I think there's plenty more bands that we just can't wait to share with everybody. So enjoy the rest of your Sunday. If you liked what you see, give a thumbs up, thumbs down. Feel free to comment. Also, if you liked what you see and you want to subscribe, click that subscribe button. 94 subscribers and getting close to that big 100. So until the next time, enjoy the rest of your weekend, VC. Take care.